I would like to call this special school board meeting to order at 4:30. Member Sanseth, can you call the roll, please?
I sure will. Member Gorham.
Present.
Chair Kirby.
Here.
Member Loeffler-Kemp is excused. Member Lofald.
Here.
Member Oswald.
Here.
I am here. Member Trinka.
Here.
Superintendent Gronseth.
Here.
Assistant Superintendent Horton.
Here.
Deputy Clerk is being held. Secretary Dolans. And Secretary Thibault.
Here.
And our student representatives are excused. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we start, I have been asked to make an announcement that live streaming will stop at 5 o'clock because of internet maintenance, I guess. So, just to let people know that. It will be recorded, so it will be, people can see this. So, I would like to introduce our guest and take it away, please. Member Gronseth. Superintendent Gronseth.
I thought I would just give a brief history. Quite a while back, we engaged in a contract with Morris Leatherman Company out of the Twin Cities area to do some polling regarding referendum, and that polling is now complete. You have the results in your hands, and Mr. Leatherman will be leading us through that, giving us some comparisons to polling that has been done in the past, in contrast to the one that we have here, and analyze the results. So,
super.
Thank you, Peter.
It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon in the lovely city of Duluth. I always love the drive up. Just to remind everyone, what's that?
Where are you from?
Champlin, north side of the Twin Cities. Just to remind everybody what we undertook for the district. We talked with 625 residents across the school district. 625 gives us a plus or minus error of 4% in 95 out of 100 cases. Now, with the 95 out of 100 cases, that's the percent chance that you have an unrepresentative sample. We can feel very comfortable with the sample because we go through with folks a series of demographics at the end of the survey. Anywhere from do they have children in the district, ethnicity, home ownership versus rental, even their area, the school district, 1, 2, 3, 4, those areas. And in looking at updated census information, we're within plus or minus 4% on all those key variables. So we feel that we have a very representative sample. As I mentioned, the 625 sample, it was conducted. We delayed it a little bit for issues happening within the district. We started it the last week of June, took the week of the 4th of July off because it's absolutely pointless to call in Minnesota, and then finished it up last week. So this data is very fresh. The last day of phoning was actually last Thursday, 1 week ago. The average interview time, the survey was it was 66 questions. The average interview time was 17 minutes. We had 7% stay on the phone with us for over 45 minutes by their own choice. They're not 7% for over 45 minutes. My phoners call them the historians of the district. One answer is not necessarily adequate in the minds of many of them. But so it averages out to that about 16, 17 minutes on the average. And everybody wants to know about cell phones. They are included. I feel like I'm neglecting this side because I have to speak into the microphone. So cell phones are included in the mix. We do a mix of landline and cell phone. And this time in the district, it was 37% indicated they were cell phone only households, 16% landline only, and then the remaining 47% had both landline and cell phone. Any questions on the methodology before we get into the results? Hearing none, I'll state up front, there's been a lot of positive changes. We did lots of surveys for Duluth, in the past 5 to 10 years ago during the RED plan. And I'm going to make some comparisons to a survey that we did in 2013, just to give you a basis of where the district was 5 years ago and where it currently is. And I would say if you're going to look across the board on all the key factors we look at, there's about 12 to 15% more favorability towards the school district on all the factors we're going to look at. Even some are as high as 20% as we're going to see. Some very positive changes. And at the outset, as you look through on a potential operating levy, there is support out there, and there's a major issue out there in the minds of folks, and that would be class sizes, and we'll go more in depth in that in a little bit through the presentation. So up front, we ask a series of questions on atmospherics. And why we ask this is because we know, I've been doing this for 25 years, my business partner's been doing this for 35 years, and we know that when working with school district referendums, when they go into the voting booth, you want a voter to make a calculation of how much it costs and what the benefit is. That's what they bring into the voting booth when they make a decision whether they're going to support or oppose. But oftentimes in school districts, there's atmospheric issues out there. There's baggage that's brought in that a voter brings and makes a decision not necessarily on what a package is and what the benefits and costs are, but something that's happened in the past. So this upfront series is looking at those atmospherics and seeing if there is that baggage out there. So the quality of education in the public schools, we ask them on a 4-point scale to rate it: excellent, good, only, fair, or poor. This time around, 77% rated it favorable, 18% rated it unfavorable. Very strong. The norm on this is about 80% favorable. But in comparison to 5 years ago, it was 64%. You've had a 13% increase in the number of people saying that the quality of education is excellent or good. Now, the key thing that districts, when they look at this data, what differentiates districts is the excellent rating. Because we know in Minnesota and actually Wisconsin, the whole Midwest, folks are less than enthusiastic graders. Folks don't get excited about a lot. It's a hard standard for people to say excellent oftentimes, or to feel strongly, they strongly agree or strongly disagree. It's how we are. We're Midwesterners. And so with the 13% excellent, that's about 5 points lower than the norm across the state. It's stable to what it was, but you've had now a growth in that good. And so a driving factor in the discussion as you look for additional funding will be to move the schools from good to excellent. People really don't feel that they're only fair, and very few feel that they're poor. But how will the funds being used make the schools move the quality of education from good to excellent? Now, a couple open-ended questions. And that means that we ask them just, what do you like most about the district? And they can tell us anything. And then we code those into responses, collapsing them into categories. And what we're looking for, what's a value here that people point to when they're looking at the quality of the schools? First off, it's personnel. It's the teachers. 28% point to the quality of the teaching staff. If we take the variety of programs and the broad curriculum, you have 23% that fall into that curriculum programming category. And then if we take the good academics and the excellent academics, you have about 20% falling into the academic quality. So you do have a hierarchy as people are looking. It's personnel first, it's programming, and then it's the academic quality off the top of their mind, what they like most. What is unusual on this chart, districts vary. Some districts are very program-driven. Others are very academic quality-driven. But what is unusual on this is the 13% that said sports is what they like most. That's more than double. The norm on that is 5%. So I don't know if it was a really good sports year or what have you, but the sports at the top of the mind is an unusual finding. But keep in mind that hierarchy is teachers, curriculum programming, and then the overall academic quality. Now, if we ask what they like most, we should follow up with what they find is the most serious issue facing the district. And once again, this is open-ended. And we use a threshold of about 20%. If 1 in 5 people coalesce around one response and say it's a serious issue, that's a major concern in the district. We don't have anything that hits the 20%, but you do have 2 that are approaching it. And the first time we see large class sizes, keep in mind we haven't discussed anything yet. Simply, what's the quality of education? What do you like most? What's the most serious? 1 in 6 people are focusing on class sizes. 15% are talking about lack of funding. So about a third of the district is already kind of thinking about discussions around an operating levy. What other things have brought up? Lack of discipline at 11%, poor spending at 10%. The red plan, it's still there, about 10% this time. 5 years ago, that was in the 30 to 35% range as the most serious issue facing the district. We'll point out taxes specifically, because the norm on those saying that high taxes is the most serious issue facing the district across the state right now is 15 to 20%. So you're less than half the norm. 2016, about this time 2 years ago, leading into the 2016 election, and it had nothing to do with the presidential race. It was the legislative races where St. Paul had a surplus, and there were a lot of discussions on property taxes. And that changed people's minds. We kind of had a diminishing concern on property taxes across the state, and ever since then, that 2 years ago, most districts saw this 10 to 15 point jump as taxes as a concern. We're going to go more in depth on taxes, but as a top of the mind concern, it's not what we see across the state.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
The lack of discipline, is that, I know that these are open-ended questions, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the nomenclature. Is that within the school, or is that like at a spending level at the district level?
It's within the school.
Okay, thank you.
It's student behavior. We do pull out bullying separately. On lack of discipline, I mean, that very much varies where we're polling in the state. The bullying and the lack of discipline, it's right about where I would expect it to be, about 10% in each. The other one, it really is, it's a universal constant, like pi. 10% in any district is upset with spending. If it goes above 10%, then there are real concerns. But if everything is, shall we say, copacetic in a district, you're still going to have 1 in 10 people that are concerned about spending in the district. How did they compare the quality of education to 5 years ago? It's pretty much a draw in their mind in the district. What we're looking for is combine the better and the worse. 18% say it's better, 18% say it's worse, 54% say it's about the same. But we know from the question a few charts ago that the overall perception of the quality of education has increased 13%. In comparison to 5 years ago, the district was actually upside down. In 2013, 15% thought it was better, 25% thought it was worse. So it was almost a 2-to-1 feeling the quality was worse than 5 years ago. Now it's an even draw. So it's a move in the right direction on public attitude and opinion. Now, does the district do a good job of meeting the learning needs of all students, most students, only some, or very few? 43% said that you meet the learning needs of all students, right about the norm across the state. Norm across the state is 45%, within the margin of error. If they say most, only some, or very few, what we do is follow up and ask them, is there a certain type of student who you feel their learning needs are not being met? And that's what's in the upper right-hand part of the chart. You can see that there's the type of student that folks are most concerned about. The behavioral issues, the underachievers, and the struggling students. If they're going to say that there's a certain type, the gifted and talented, even the average students don't rise to the percents that, shall we say, less than average or struggling students. That's the concern area folks have. And that also in side comments, especially when we talked about class sizes specifically. If you're concerned about class sizes, those are the type of students that oftentimes get lost in the mix in the minds of residents out there. If class sizes are too high, that's how these types of students are underserved, shall we say. Now, this chart, and there's been some really impressive changes on this from 5 years ago, testing specific district perceptions. The first question is, does the school district spend taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently? What we're looking for on this question is going over 50%. That's the threshold we want. 57% agree with that statement. That's up from 29% 5 years ago. An increase of 28%. It's doubled in the amount of people agreeing with that statement. Does the district consider a tax increase only as a last resort? Now, on this one, we're also looking for a 50% threshold. You're at 55%. But 5 years ago, that was 40%, a 15% increase. So historically, big changes in the perception of financial management and credibility in the district. And those 50% thresholds are they're very important. You need at least half the people to believe that you're spending taxpayers' money effectively and being good stewards. And on both of those, you go over 50%. The district has financial credibility out there. Now, are the schools a good value for the investment? Right about the norm. Norm on this is 80% across the state. 77% said that they are a good value. 5 years ago, 67% said they were good value, an increase of 10% from 5 years ago. Do they trust you to do what's right for the children? We didn't ask this question 5 years ago, but this time around, 82%. Very strong. Within the margin of error, norm on that is 85%. Does the district do a good job of involving residents, parents in decision making? 63% agree with that statement. It's a little below the norm. Norm on that is 70%. But in comparison to 5 years ago, that's up 20 points. You only had 43% agreeing with the statement 5 years ago. And the first time then we dip our toe in a discussion on a potential operating levy is the schools are a good investment, and I would support a property tax increase for that investment. 58% say they agree with that statement, 31% disagree, and 11% want more information. So we know at the outset the core opposition, and keep in mind that they don't know if it's an operating levy, a bond referendum. They don't know if it's 50 cents or $50 a month. They're against it from the outset, regardless of the facts for this. So the core opposition is 31%. Anytime that's between 30 and 35%, that's pretty typical with all the referendums that we work on. Job ratings. The school board this time around, 57% favorable, 34% unfavorable. The norm on this, you're above the norm. We look at a ratio. Because what varies across the state is uncertainty. Anytime you go above 1.5 to 1 on a school board rating and the superintendent and administration, we view the district is well regarded with governance and administration in the minds of the public. But in comparison to 5 years ago, the board rating is up 20 points. 37% rated the board favorably 5 years ago, and 5 years ago on the superintendent and administration, 49% rated it favorably. So that's increased by 8%. What this shows at this point in time, though, is in the minds of residents, there's a cohesive nature that they see from the school district. You can always see dysfunction in a district when the board rating is very high and the superintendent's very low, or vice versa. It's almost a 1-for-1 in the minds of residents. And the teachers, they're adored now, 85%, but that is also up. It was 72% 5 years ago. So that's up 13 points. Just very strong ratings across the board for the governance, administration, and the quality of teachers and the quality of the teachers in the classroom. Yes, sir.
So I've noticed on these last couple slides that it got down to 3. Was that still a 4-point scale?
Which ones? Yes.
So those were both a 4-point scale. What's the breakdown that gets it to 3 rather than 4?
The 4 points of the agreement, disagreement, this chart specifically. So the blue is strongly agree, red is disagree, strongly disagree. We don't, and it is intentional because once again, like I talked about enthusiasm being hard to get out of people in Minnesota, if you give people an odd number scale in Minnesota, they'll pick the middle. And you know, my business partner and I feel strongly that, you know what, nobody is right in the middle. You might feel a little bit positive and a little bit negative, and we kind of, so, you know, we are guilty of pushing people to an opinion, to take an opinion, not guilty of forcing them into saying yes or no, but wanting them to make a decision not to be in the middle. It is intentional to have that 4-part scale. Now, do they believe that Duluth schools are adequately funded? This, I didn't put up the history on this one because this varies. This has much more to do with what happens in St. Paul for perceptions and who runs around saying who gave what to who. 2 years ago, it was 45-45 across the state. Then over the last biennium, what happened there with the funding and how it was reported. Across the state now, the average is 60 to 65% saying that, yes, they're adequately funded. It changed people's perceptions. That hasn't happened here in Duluth, though. You're about 10 points lower than what we see across the state of people saying that that the schools are adequately funded here. Only 52% agree with that, 38% disagree with it, and 10% have no idea, which you can't blame them with the messaging that happens out there. So you do have more people right now saying that the schools aren't adequately funded than most school districts. Property tax comparisons. The dark brown bar is the perception of total taxes. The yellow bar is their perception of school taxes. Total taxes, 41% say that they believe they're very high or somewhat high, 48% about average. Nobody said low, not surprising, and 11% are unsure. What we look for as a threshold is 50% saying their taxes are either very high or somewhat high. If it's above 50%, we consider the district to have a hostile tax environment. You don't have that. You're at 41%. We would classify it as a benign tax environment. You actually have more people saying they're about average. Historically, if we go back 5 years ago, it was 50% that said their taxes were high. So the perception on taxes has dropped here by 9 points. And this is at a time, like I mentioned early on, with the most serious issue, that we're seeing these 10 to 15 point jumps in school districts from their historical numbers to the current perceptions. The concern about property taxes hasn't come into Duluth like we see across the state. Now, we asked the school taxes portion because what we're trying to ascertain is if you feel your taxes are high, who are you blaming? I started doing this 25 years ago. We actually asked people, who do you blame? And then cities and counties got upset with us when we could point it out. So now we just asked, do you think your school taxes are high? And you can see 36% say that they're high, down 5 points. So those that view their property taxes are high, the animus is not focused so much at the school district, city, county, what have you, but not at the district. This is helpful to know. When you have 41%, though, the total taxes, this allows the district to have a conversation about additional funding. It's a much easier environment. We have districts, there's one on the north side of the Twin Cities that has 77% in the very high and somewhat high category. That is an incredibly difficult environment to even start a discussion on additional funding. So this really shows that the issue's ripe for discussion in the community. Now, the overall financial management, it's about a tie. 43% rated favorably, 48% rated unfavorably. A little bit lower. We always like to see that over 50%. But historically, you were coming up 5 years ago, only 29% rated it excellent or good. So there's been a 14-point increase on the question of the overall financial management of the district. What's their perception on the budget outlook? More information's needed to be in the discussion out there, because you have equal amounts of people saying it's going to get better and it's going to get worse. 25% say it's going to get better, 26% say it's going to get worse, and 43% say it's going to be about the same. You can see if we look at the intense categories, much better versus much worse. You have about 1 in 10 people saying it's going to get much worse as opposed to much better in that regard. But this kind of indicates that confusion that we saw earlier on are the schools adequately funded? 52% did still agree with that statement. Now,
Can I ask a question on that one?
Absolutely.
So the question is more at getting to, do you think the schools are going to be adequately funded in the future? Not how we're managing our budget.
Correct. Do you think the budget outlook for the Duluth Public Schools is likely to get much better, a little better, stay about the same, a little worse, or much worse over the next 5 years?
Okay.
Is the threshold we used. Now, the issue out there, and we saw it as the top concern when we asked what the most serious issue was, is class sizes. And we went through each of the school levels, elementary, middle school, and high school, and told people what the average class size was. So they were reacting to a number, not a perception. So the question then we asked them after telling them the number, is that number too low? Or should the number be lower? Should it be higher? Or is it at about the right level? Elementary schools, 43% said it should be lower. 55% said it was about the right amount. Middle schools, 57% said it should be lower. 42% said it was about the right amount. And the high schools, 59% said it was lower, should be lower. 38% said it was about the right amount. So the concern here in the district is the secondary level class sizes. They're reacting to an actual number on that. That's very important. Now, elementary schools still have 43% saying they should be lower. That's a large number. But keep in mind, if you go to the high schools, that number goes up by an additional 16 points. It really is a big issue. And we're going to see in just a little bit when we talk about the operating levy, people are willing to spend tax dollars, give tax dollars to the district for that purpose.
What was the number they were responding to?
Sure. The average class size in elementary schools is 25. Average class size in core classes in middle school, 29. And the average class size in core courses in high school was 30. So we now ask for a general predisposition question. If you heard the district was going to ask for a property tax increase, would you be for any property tax increase? Would you be against any property tax increase, or would you be for some and against others? The district at this point, the first thing we look at is the difference between against all and for all. You can see you actually have 4% more people saying they're for anything than against everything. There's so much to say about this. The norm over the past 2 years, last year we helped districts, we worked on 29 questions and helped pass 27 of them. And they came in, the norm was -4. They actually had more people in opposition at the outset than support. You're in a much different situation where you actually have more support out there. It's amazing, though, the difference to 5 years ago. 5 years ago, 37% said they were against any property tax increase. 13% said they were for any. 5 years ago, on the scale where you were a +4, the district was a -24. That's a very steep hill to overcome. But keep in mind, even though you do have 46% of people that have made up their minds without any facts, in essence, they don't know if it's an operating levy or a bond, what have you, you still have 51%, and that's the key portion of the residents that are for some and against something. Okay? So the operating levy, we told folks that currently the school district has an operating levy for $2.9 million per year. The funding provides approximately 3% of the school district budget, and it will expire after the 2018-19 school year. If this renewal is not passed, the district will be faced with budget cuts likely impacting programs and the size of classes. If successful, there will not be a property tax increase because this ballot question simply continues an existing levy. 81% support the renewal. 16% oppose the renewal, 3% are unsure. If we look at the intense categories, it's 6-1 strong support versus strong opposition. The renewal is in a very good place with residents at this point in time. Now, we then went through a list and asked them about potential uses of additional funding. And this is with and they're given the caveat, tell me whether you would strongly support a property tax increase for that purpose. So this goes beyond concept, and they're being asked, would you support or oppose a property tax increase for this purpose? I put this up in hierarchy of support, even though you can see they're all supported strongly. And specifically, lowering high school lower class sizes at all high schools, 73 to 26, but 46% of residents said they strongly support a property tax increase for that purpose. Expansion of early childhood programs, 72 to 23. Update district technology infrastructure such as servers, routers, and wires, and replace aging devices such as computers and projectors for students and teachers. That is at 72 to 24. And change the high school schedule to allow more academic opportunities for students, 72 to 25. All of these are so well regarded that people will support a referendum even at a higher dollar amount. When we work with districts and we break these out, if we get 70% on something, that's oftentimes a leading indicator, and sometimes it'll go down. I mean, there are sometimes we test something that it's 20% support, 80% opposition. You have 4 of them that are strongly supported. And you know, I mentioned the 46% that strongly supported class sizes. There's still intensity on all the other 3, just to give you those numbers. On the expansion of early childhood programs, 39% strongly support. On district technology infrastructure, 43% strongly support. And the high school schedule, 36% strongly support. So you have a third to up to half, almost half of folks in a category saying, I strongly support a property tax increase for that purpose. Now, the key is going to be, how much does it cost? We haven't attached dollars to it yet.
Can I ask a question here?
Absolutely.
And this is probably more for the superintendent. Did these, the particular questions or the talking points of lowering class size and early childhood, whatever, did those come from something we decided as a board, or did those come straight from administration in terms of the options for the survey?
Those came in response to our Think Kids meetings and the meetings that we had with staff, that those came out as the strongest themes in those conversations.
Okay, thank you.
So we ask folks, we do our let's make a deal question, and we go up or down the scale. So the phoner will start and ask, would you support a property tax increase of $8 a month for an operating levy? If they say yes, they say, how about $12 a month? And they move up or down the scale. First off, 28% said nothing. That's actually lower. The norm is between 30 and 35%. Anytime that number is under 35%, the district's in good shape at the outset. Now, as we go across, you're pretty consistent support at 4, 8, and 12. Comes in at about, if we look at the median, it's about $8 a month. If we take out the nothing, which I oftentimes like to do because they don't support anything, so if we include it, you go up to about 10 or $11. That's the range that people are willing to support at the outset. That's the tax tolerance. Now, that number's not set in stone. I've seen districts last year, a district in Richfield School District. The survey came in and residents supported about 10 or $11 a month. They had, and there was a bond referendum, they had some components on there, like you saw in your previous chart, at 75% support in concept. They actually went for two and a half times higher amount. It was about $27 a month they put on the ballot, and it passed 70-30. So the number can be driven up if what the funding is going to be used for is supported enough. On the flip side, I've seen districts come in under the number and include something that's a red flag or a deal breaker. And oftentimes it's a bond referendum, and oftentimes it's artificial turf or an ice arena, what have you, and it loses. It's just meant to give you an indicator at the outset of where the tolerance is. But keep in mind, this previous chart, there's buoyancy in that number when you have almost 3/4 support across the board on these four concepts.
Can you tell us what that translates to if we were, say, $10 a month for Duluth? What's the total that we'd be looking at then in revenue? So if we said voters are going to accept $10 a month per household, what does that translate to in terms of what we're getting per year for a referendum?
I think he's about to go into that in the next couple slides.
I don't know exactly what it equates to, but I'll tell you what we tested. Okay. And so for this chart then,
I could say for the average $150,000 household, this comes out to a little over $9 for this question.
Yep. This is $9 a month.
$5.75 is $9.
Yep. So we told folks that the school district, if they proposed an additional operating levy for $575 per pupil unit for the next 10 years, this increase in the levy would provide the district with an additional $5 million. And we told them on a $150,000 home, it's $9 a month. On a $250,000 home, it's $15 a month. Those were the price points. 58% support, 32% opposed. On intensity, about 2-to-1 strong support versus strong opposition.
Can you repeat the introduction you gave on this one again?
A $575 per pupil unit for the next 10 years. This increase would provide the district with an additional $5 million per year.
And can you also restate, so for a $150,000 home, it would be about $9 a month, and for a $250,000 home? 15, thank you. Now,
we asked them then an open-ended question, and what's the reason for their position on the levy? The blue are the reasons of support, red is the reason for opposition. Let's go to the red first, because poor district spending comes up, leads the list at 18%. The core opposition here is based in the past. On the taxes too high, 12%. But notice nobody said the cost is too high. We differentiate that because some people will oppose because their taxes are already too high. I don't want to any tax increase. Other people will say, I can't afford a tax increase because the cost of the package is too high. Nobody said the cost is too high. The other thing that nobody said in reason for opposition is it wasn't needed. Okay? On the flip side, on support, what leads the list is the soft reason. Education's important, kids are important. But if we take, you need to avoid cuts, lower class sizes, and technology updates, I'll classify those into a need. They're reacting for a specific need. That's 30% of people indicating that's their reason for support. Keeping in mind also that that tax increase that we told them is right about the level of their tax tolerance. Thus, 13% of supporters say the cost is reasonable. On a discussion of need in the district, though, for the position on the operating levy, it's not a need versus not need. Even opponents admit that. It's not so much how much it costs. If you're opposing, you think your taxes are too high, or you have concerns with the past at this point in time. We read some messages. The first set is, oh, it's pouring. We didn't test a bond referendum. The first set is a series of messages in favor of an operating levy. The next is in opposition. What leads the list, and we asked them, does it make you much more likely, somewhat more likely, or no different? Make no difference to you in supporting an operating levy? What leads the list is the message: further reductions in curriculum and increases in class sizes will cause students to leave the Duluth schools again. If that occurs, school funding will further decrease in a downward spiral. More cuts and fewer students will continue. 37% said that made them much more likely to support. 32% said that made them somewhat more likely to support. It's a very strong argument. The next two are also very strong arguments. The curriculum and staff cuts resulting from the loss of operating levy will prevent students from mastering skills and abilities needed to compete in an ever-changing world. 36% said it made them much more likely, 69% total impact. And the stable funding argument: with additional revenue, the district will have stable funding and be able to provide consistent programs for our students. 34% support, total impact of 65%. So those top three would be what we call the leading messages. The other three, kind of more work amongst current supporters that are already there. You know, they're for everything. What we're looking for is the persuadables. Which are the key messages for folks? The other messages, just so you know, the state of Minnesota has not provided an adequate funding increase for the last 4 school years. Followed up by Duluth voters have not increased the operating levy since 2003. Now we need to invest a little more in our schools. And without additional revenue, even with just a renewal of the current operating levy, annual budget reductions of $500,000 will be needed.
Hawks is not on the agenda tonight?
I was just going to say, is there anywhere out there that says, move into a new district?
Can I ask, these messaging questions that you're asking, are these these are the standard ones that you come up with, or are these did we suggest these as potential messages?
We work with the district on messaging. Some are standard. Okay. You know, the state of Minnesota has not provided adequate funding, yeah. But then some specific messaging that we work with the district on.
Okay, thanks.
Then on the flip side, because we're fair and balanced, you have to test both. Messages against the operating levy. The leading message against is funding for local schools is adequate and they need to spend the money they have better. 26% say it makes them much more likely to oppose, 52% total impact. Local property taxes are going up too quickly. We just can't afford to put more taxes for education on the backs of homeowners, 24 and 52. The district should spend down its fund balance before asking residents to approve a property tax increase, 23%, 52.
This is really morbid humor.
Yeah. It's interesting, a message that resonates very well in lots of other districts is the one that's in fourth place here. The state legislature increased education funding last year, so local taxpayers do not need to provide additional funding. That oftentimes is a very effective message of opposition in districts, and it doesn't resonate here like it resonates elsewhere. And then the past. You can see there's the 37%, and the question is, I disagreed with the decisions of the school district in the past, so I am not willing to provide additional funding at this time. It's still last on the list, but it's there. As a cumulative, though, or as an aggregate on all of the messages pro and all the messages against, the messages in favor carry much more weight than the messages against. The messages against operate what I call within the echo chamber of opposition. Okay? So then...
How did you gain that? How do you gain the against and the support? So the people answering against, did they also answer the first, or
Sure.
are these, they did?
Yep.
So you'd say, if you support it, why would you? And that's it. And then if you don't support it, why wouldn't you?
Right. No, well, these are, we're reading messages just to see, and we're asking them, if you heard this message, does it make you much more likely? So you could say, and people will say, there's a message that makes me much more likely to support. There's also a message up here that makes me much more likely to oppose.
I got you.
It's kind of a fluid thing. You think about it during a campaign. You'll hear a pro message and an anti-message. That's why we come back and do the post test and ask people, have we changed your mind, basically? You've heard arguments, a series of arguments for and a series of arguments against. Has it changed your mind? And it really doesn't. There's a little bit more strong support and a little bit less strong opposition. It's not statistically significant. It's still 60% support, 31% opposed, 2-to-1 on both the intensity and the overall. So the messages then net out to a net plus for the district. I'll flip back here. It was 58-32. It's not statistically significant, but it goes to 60-31 after putting all those messages you heard in front of the resident. And then a couple questions on where folks are getting their information. What's their principal source of information? This is open-ended. 1 in 4 say it's the website. 1 in 4 say it's the Duluth News Tribune. The word of mouth, this is open-ended. It's alive and lush. 1 in 7 people say it is their principal source of information. 13% said the district newsletter, 12% mailings, and then single digits. So it really, there's still, if we're going to add up, look at electronic versus print, how are people getting it? It's still predominantly print at this point. If you take the newsletter, the newspaper, mailings, there's 49% right there. Now, how do folks, what's the most effective way to receive information? Little bit different in the hierarchy. What comes up and pulls down some of the other numbers is email. 10% indicate that they want to get the most effective way is that they get information via email. But I will say this about email. Email has now become the new junk mail. People say they want to be emailed, but then they don't open it, they don't respond. And it has become over the past couple years that we see, and we do, we don't just work with school districts on referendums, we go in and we'll do communication audits. And I classify a district that relies on email and the district website, because both of those require a proactive behavior from a person. They have to go to the website and get the information. They have to click on the email. That the level of information that a person relying on electronic sources of information has is not nearly as deep, and the depth is not there. I say oftentimes it's a mile wide and an inch deep, because it requires them to take a proactive action.
Can I ask a quick question while we're other duties as assigned, Assistant Superintendent Horton? Welcome to Duluth. Thinking about some of these, are you differentiating when you're talking about the local newspaper between the print and the online presence of the Duluth News Tribune?
That is the print.
Okay.
Yep.
And you specify that, because if somebody were to ask me, do you read the paper, I would say every morning. Yeah. But it's online.
Right. It's print. We differentiate in the coding. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing to point out on this chart is the word of mouth. 14%, which I said is high, a high percentage of people saying that they rely on word of mouth. It is astonishing that 7% of people, if you offer them what's the most effective way, they still prefer that as the most effective way to receive information. That's very small town. Then your population would indicate for mentality on how to get information. The grapevine is alive and lush, and I'm sure you're all aware of it and not surprised.
It is, yeah.
Those are all my slides. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions, have a discussion.
Hey, the internet held. Done.
Or did you just, it might just be on your computer. If you try to refresh it, it might go away. So, do you have a breakdown of, I think you had mentioned this earlier, the age of respondents, the financial, socioeconomic breakdown, ethnicity? Mm-hmm. Do we have access to that information? That would be helpful.
Yeah, I can give you some numbers. Just to give you an idea of the makeup of the sample, 23% were millennials between the age of 18 and 34. 41% were over the age of 55. 41. 15% indicated they had preschoolers. 22% had children in the Duluth School District. Education level, 23% were high school graduate or less, while 44% were college graduate or higher. Home ownership, 37% were renters. The largest group, we asked homeowners, is your home between 100,000, 100 and 150, or over 150? Between 100 and 100,000 was 31% of the sample. Ethnicity, 78% were white, 5% African American, 3% Hispanic Latino, 2% Asian Pacific Islander, 4% Native American, 6% indicated that they were mixed or biracial, multiracial. Financial situation of the household, we don't ask income anymore. We figured out long ago that income doesn't necessarily equate to ability to pay. You can make a lot of money and still be in debt and can't afford a property tax increase. So we ask people to classify themselves into 4 categories. And you have 41% that are in a category we would classify as financially stressed versus 59% that are in categories that indicate that they're financially comfortable. The districts, District 1 was 29%, District 2 24%, District 3 25%, District 4 22%, and gender 48% male, 52% female. And that one's intentional. That's the one thing that we have to work on, because in Minnesota, if you talk to the person who answers the phone, you'll have a sample of 70% female, because we call it the Honeywell You're Up factor. Men don't answer the phone in this state. And so what we do is we ask for a person whose birthday is nearest to the day we're calling, because birthdays don't have any gender bias, and that way we can balance the sample into that 48-52% threshold.
Do you keep calling until you get an answer? Do you, so you start out with, you surveyed 625, but actually how many calls do you make to get 625?
Yeah, I mean, once we know the number's good, we work hard to get them. The refusal rate, I believe, on this one was about 6%, which over the summer. What we do is, because we don't, just like if we let it flow freely with who answers the phone for male and female, if we just, okay, the number's nobody's answering, let's go on to the next, we would also bias the sample towards those with an active lifestyle. Households with children, they're busier. So what we do is, if it's not convenient to take the survey when we call, we set up appointments. And typically between 40 and 50% of the phone calls are completed. So I'll call you and you'll say, I'm taking my child into this or that, or I'm going out for dinner. When's it convenient to call you back? And we'll set up appointments for 10 the next day or what have you. Especially with the time frame that we were calling, it was important to do it a week before the 4th and a week after the 4th to get people on the front and back end, because we don't want to be in a situation, a lot of pollsters, and it gets them in trouble, is they reweight data. So I've called as fast as I can. I have 60% female. I have 50% over the age of 65, and now I'm going to reweight it to bump up millennials and households with children and everything, but that doesn't necessarily, demographics doesn't equate to opinion so much, and that's where a lot of pollsters get in trouble.
Very cool.
Would it be possible for us to get a copy of the questions at this point? Emailed to us? Thanks.
So you said that you worked on 29 ballot questions last year, and 24, 25 of them, or 21?
27
27, okay. So how does this data stack up to like last year's cycle of successful ballot initiatives?
It looks good at the outset. The one obvious major difference now is last year being an off year, and those campaigns, a lot of districts, that was the only thing on the ballot. And so the vote yes had to be extraordinarily strong. It wasn't only an informational campaign, it was a get out the vote effort also. With this election, it's not a get out the vote effort. It's a persuasional campaign that a vote yes would have to do, and it'll be critical. The good thing, in the sense, is that you know that class sizes are such a major issue out there in the minds of the community and the discussion, but with higher vote turnout, it's easier for people for communications and messaging to get lost, shall we say. It's going to be cluttered. There's just no other way around it. And we know that a surprised voter on election day, if you walk in and you're going to vote for governor and your 2 senators and you weren't paying any attention and you see an operating levy, you're going to vote no. It's just surprise voters or no voters. So the key on this is communication and getting the message out there. Here's what we're asking for. Here's the purpose of what we're asking for, and then here's the cost. Those are the key factors in this. It's a different election environment. But at the outset, and we have some questions on here looking at likely voters, and I did some data runs looking at likely voters. Even the most likely voters are still as supportive as the community as overall. So the district is not. There are times where high turnout is not advantageous. That's not the case here. The support is pretty uniform across the district.
Can we look at the class size slide and just, it seems, I just I think the numbers that you asked, 25 for elementary, 29 for middle school, and 30 for high school, those don't seem to be what our community sees as the perception. So are we off on, does our community perceive our class sizes to be larger? And even now, even with the class sizes that you surveyed out, and they still say class sizes are too high, astounds me. Because 25, 29, and 30 are from I'm a classroom teacher for 39 years. Those would be right in a very acceptable class size in my classroom. So I think our community thinks they're higher than this.
This varies so much on expectation and that the history that people have. As you mentioned, I live in Champlin, which is in the Anoka-Hennepin School District. My son just graduated high school, and he had some classes that had 40 kids in it. I look at 30 and say, well, that's really good. I mean, I'm impressed. But I think especially when you look at those over the age of 55 that haven't had contact with the schools for a long time, oftentimes when they hear those numbers, they're reacting to what it was when they were growing up, and oftentimes it wasn't that level that high. There really is, they're reacting to concrete, which is why we want to ask them. There are times that a district just says, well, ask them, do they think that the class sizes are excellent, good, only, fair, or poor? And we can do that. But I like this question better because you know exactly, you're putting everybody on equal footing with the knowledge. Here's the average class size, and react to a number instead of giving me your perception overall. But I would agree with you. In Anoka-Hennepin, the high school number would be flipped if I told them that it was 30%.
Well, I still wonder, you got these numbers to ask from superintendent?
Yeah, from the administration.
And these are for the middle and high school, and it does say the core courses. Because you take your core English, social studies, science, math, and we took the core of those because when we include all of our electives, that can really throw some things off.
Choir's at 60.
Right.
Yeah, Phi-Ed is at 40, yeah.
Right, or a special education course that has 5 or 6. So we focus in on the core and then take the average of that. And at the elementary, that's a little tough too because we have different ratios for different grade levels. So you have kindergarten and 5th grade being averaged out to be that 25 number where, 25 at kindergarten would be high, and 5th grade it would be low. So that kind of gets the middle.
My question is about next steps. My understanding is we have a meeting Thursday next week, and we're going to be voting on something related to this.
Thursday's meeting, and my recommendation for Thursday's meeting, how's that?
Yes.
Would be for you to decide whether or not you will be going for a referendum in November and take a look at the board-approved authority information and make a decision on that. And then we will plan. There's another question going on right now. The county has a couple of different dates that they put out there as our deadline. And I've had more conversations.
Shame on the county.
I know that. Do you know any attorneys at the county's office?
No idea.
I could slide a statute your way. Anyway, I think that we're working towards that deadline being on the 24th. So then we have a little more time to really nail down some input from community members and more discussion about what those questions could be within our August meetings, so that we could have that before the deadline on the 24th, but still do it within our regular schedule.
So Thursday next week is going to be yes or no, should we have a referendum, and then next month we're looking at what is going to be the language that we're going to propose on the referendum?
That's, as long as we're agreeable that the 24th is the date.
August.
If the county wants those questions by the 14th, that's going to move up our timeline a bit.
But it still probably wouldn't be next week.
Right.
Okay.
I think that it would be healthy for us to finish the budgeting piece before we ask those questions.
Agreed.
That work for everybody?
One clarification, Superintendent. The vote next week on yes or no includes, yes would include just continuing or renewing the existing referendum.
It doesn't even have to be that much. It just means we're making a resolution on our intent to go out for a referendum.
Okay.
And now we're going to take some time to decide what the language is around that referendum.
But if we said no next week, it would be that we couldn't even ask for renewal.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So now I'm confused about the renewal part. The renewal, the issue we tabled on Tuesday, is that the renewal?
No.
Okay, thank you.
But to circle or to continue on, I don't think Nora's question got answered. So we are going to vote on yes, no on this, and then we're also going to vote on the school board authorized piece as well. So they're two separate conversations.
And I know we asked if you would have a presentation for us on the board versus community vote to renew. Is there a chance that if you can do it in a PowerPoint and send it earlier to us so we could look at it, that would really help our conversation. I think back to just some things you laid out for me when I had questions. I would think that would really work for most of us. I don't think we're looking for anything huge, but a few PowerPoint slides on what that looks like would be helpful. And if you give it to us by Wednesday even, I think we'd have time then to digest it. And no, yeah, because it's Thursday. But
I'll get it to you as soon as I possibly can.
Might be read.
It looked like it was going to stop. It looked stopped.
No other questions by anyone? Then we can adjourn.
Second.
I'll use my executive authority. We're done.
Wonderful.